everyone. Good morning, and thank you for coming to Friday Forum. So to kick off this semester series, we get to hear from and talk to someone that's a pretty familiar face in the building, Professor Rick Plotz. So Rick has been a professional motion designer and 3D animator for about 10 years now. Since graduating from the Brandcenter in 2014, he's worked on countless brands with virtually every Richmond agency, including Arts and Letters and the Martin Agency. In addition to teaching at the Brandcenter, Rick also instructs courses for Brandcenter's Executive Education Program, BCX. And if that wasn't enough, he's also currently a motion designer for Capital One, working on their internal brand content.
Rick is here today to talk about the future of interaction and the internet within the Metaverse, Web3, NFTs, and how we as Brandcenter students are uniquely positioned to model the future of everything. So Rick, I'll pass it off to you.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. Let me just make sure you can all hear this. Let's see. Okay, you guys all hear that? Thank you, Ryan and Kaz, for the intro. I just wanted to get started real quick. Even though I kind of gave you a clickbaity title, I want to make one little revision to it. It's actually everything is in Web3. And we'll get to why that's changed, but and you know, real quick, I think the metaverse as a term is actually kind of inaccurate, and I will explain why in this presentation. Now, let me just get a couple of things set up. Okay, fun fact. When I was 3 years old, dir was the first word I ever learned how to spell. It was actually a DOS command to list the directory contents of a floppy disk. And little did I know that I was growing up right alongside the personal computing revolution in the 80s and 90s. Now, this was not only desktop computing, it was also personal entertainment, and specifically the Nintendo and the Atari and Sega Genesis later. Now, I was the first generation to grow up in front of screens, born in the year of our Lord, 1982. Now, my dad worked in computers, and we had a computer in my house pretty much since I was growing up. And I remember, I think it was 1994 or something around that time, he brought home a laptop computer and he started telling me about a thing that he was working on. And he said, imagine you had a printer or a mouse or anything else, and it was connected to your computer, but it didn't have any wires to it. And you could print to things wirelessly or do other things without having to connect to your laptop. And it transmitted data through the air, was what he would say. And he was really excited about it. Now, I didn't really believe it. But what he said was nobody has a name for the technology yet. And so they named it after some pirate. They called him codename Bluetooth. And it turns out this technology was developed, and the actual name was the Danish king Harald Bluetooth. And the logo for Bluetooth is actually his initials in Nordic runes. Now, again, engineers were working on this in 1995. It's kind of a funny side story. His company eventually thought that the technology wasn't viable and passed on it. And at that time too, around that same time, his company was starting to look at the internet and the idea that it could be wireless and not through a phone line. And they're like, yeah, we could do this thing called like wireless internet. And I think hotels would be a really great idea to put them in. And the company also passed on that, thinking it was too expensive and that no one would use it. So that was in 95. Now, here we were at home, unplugging our home phone line to plug into a little jack in the laptop so we could use something called America Online. And I only had 500 minutes to spend on this thing that people were calling internet. And, looking back on this now, it was really kind of a bald-faced racket that America Online was trying to sell access to the internet. And then this happened.
But I think about this, and what about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Sure.
What the hell is that exactly?
Well, it's become a place where people are publishing information.
Right.
So everybody can have their own homepage. Companies are there. The latest information. It's wild what's going on. You can send electronic mail to people. It is the big new thing.
Yeah, but it's easy to criticize something you don't fully understand, which is my position here.
Go ahead.
But I can remember a couple of months ago, there was like a big breakthrough announcement that on the internet or on some computer deal, they were going to broadcast a baseball game. You could listen to a baseball game on your computer. And I just thought to myself, does radio ring a bell? You know what I mean?
There's a difference.
There is a difference.
It's not a huge difference.
What is the difference?
But you can listen to the baseball game whenever you want.
Right.
Too.
Oh, I see. So it's stored in one of your memory deals,
Exactly.
and then you can come
That's
back
the
a year
RAM
later.
thing you talked about earlier.
Yeah. Do tape recorders ring a bell?
Now, none of us in 95 could even fathom what the internet was going to become. And it seemed like a gimmick and a crude game. It was hard to describe. It was clunky and slow, and it was really kind of boring. But it was a paradigm shift. And it was a technological and cultural revolution, and is one of the greatest inventions of mankind. And we're on the brink of another one right now. But before that, let's go back to the beginning. So in the 60s and 70s, the internet was created as an experiment in decentralized communication for the military. In the event of a large-scale nuclear attack, the government wanted a way to communicate that didn't rely on one location, and it instead used nodes that were connected across the country, located mostly in universities. And Web 1.0 came out of that. Now it was, like this, largely read-only text. Hyperlinks were a big deal, but it was really hard to code and create content. But the point of it was that it was decentralized in nature. And that was one of the major features of the first version of the internet. Web 2.0 is what we have now, which began with MySpace, with more of a social movement and the ability to create content and share it around with everybody else that was on the internet. And it was community oriented. It was, designed to create content and build community. And all of this was accelerated by the iPhone and the advancement of the mobile phone platforms that we see today. Hold on. I know that's like kind of a sidebar, but it's important to show context because we already have the metaverse. It's really just an immersive place to explore, work, play games, socialize, things we already do. And we actually have many metaverses like Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. But these are walled gardens in a sense. In them, we have separate profiles and logins and behaviors. We keep our TikTok behavior off LinkedIn, everything like that. But they're also just 2D scrolling experiences that take place on usually a phone on a tiny screen. And this is what we have now. We've all gotten used to that, but the metaverse really will be more of an immersive experience with all those things still involved. And it's be powered by VR, AR, and built in 3D with real-time game engines like Unity and Unreal. We'll go from scrolling to strolling, so to speak. And a lot of it's going to take place at work initially. For the next 5 years, what we have is our online profile will go from a 2D picture and some text to full 3D avatars that we design ourselves. And it'll be captured volumetrically in the sense that it'll be 3D capture of us like this right here, or it can be things that we design ourselves. But the point is, our profiles will become these 3D objects. And the other thing about it is, instead of one profile for each experience, we're going to end up using a universal avatar that's going to flow between all of them fluidly, between our work and our games and our virtual home life. And that'll all be the same standard format. And the metaverse will live inside of Web3, which is just one of the ways that it will change everything. And it's built on 3 foundational elements that are all revolutionary in their simplicity: blockchain, cryptocurrency, and NFTs. Now, blockchain, without getting too technical, are blocks of encrypted data that are chained together with code, and then copies of that blockchain are distributed peer-to-peer. Now, a blockchain, technically speaking, is a public ledger. It's an open source ledger of record that is chained together with code. And as new blocks of data are added, those blocks of data are sent to all the other copies of that blockchain in all the other networks that are distributed peer-to-peer. So in that way, with encrypted, chained together blocks of data that are then copied and distributed, and then every copy is then updated every time a new block is added, it's really a virtually unhackable public ledger system. And just real quick, this is a great shout out to a channel that's a great explainer of many technical things. Now, with blockchain, Bitcoin was created on top of that blockchain technology, really in response to the 2008 financial crash, because the point of it was Satoshi Nakamoto wanted to create a peer-to-peer version of electronic cash that didn't have to go through banks or governments. And, and they might mess it up. So he wanted to be able to send cash directly to people back and forth. And the thing about it is the white paper was written by him, except that, well, him or her, because it's not even a real name. And it's actually one of the great modern mysteries of Web3 is that no one knows really who invented this technology. And no one has come forward yet to take full credit of cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency is built using blockchain technology. And while there's many different tokens, I'm going to focus on the 2 main ones right now, which are Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now, Bitcoin is mined, or Bitcoins are created by solving a complex math problem. And because of that, at some point, the problem is going to get so complicated that computers can't solve it. So there will only be about 21 million Bitcoin ever made. And some think that the last one will be mined in the year 2140. But the point of that is it's scarcity. And it's something that is kind of foundational to currency in general right now as a concept is that scarcity creates value. So the point of that math problem was to, at some point, never be able to create any more. And because of that, the value would just keep going up. Now, because it's the original viable proof of concept, it is, the most valuable crypto coin that exists today. But the thing about it is, it's also kind of useless. It really just kind of mines to create more Bitcoin. Now, the innovation on top of that is Ethereum. And what that is a crypto token and a software platform, so that other apps and other tokens can be built on top of that blockchain. And this is the current standard of Web3 right now, because it was kind of the proof of concept in a practical way with a blockchain that's a token and an NFT platform. Now the Ethereum blockchain is different than the Bitcoin blockchain, and anybody can create their own blockchain. But Ethereum right now is the standard, and there are many others that are being developed right now that provide, very interesting innovations on top of Ethereum, because there are a lot of problems to it. The next thing is NFTs, non-fungible tokens, in the sense that currency is fungible. So $1 equals $1. The sense that NFTs are, uniquely valuable. There's nothing else that compares to them. Is kind of a foundational aspect of what NFTs are. And what that allows is authentic ownership of a digital asset. It's a place on the blockchain that nobody else can occupy. And in that sense, digital assets can now be unique, which was never the case before. Now, for an example, let's take a car. Now, there's many, inside of a model of a car, there's many copies of the same kind of car, but there's only one identification number per car. That's a unique code to that one car only. And that's basically an NFT, except that it's digital. Now, an NFT can be any digital file, audio, video, a 3D model, a tweet, anything. Now, I'm going to come back to this, but this is a very prominent NFT art project right now in the NFT space. The thing about it is, a lot of people will dismiss this as just a JPEG, but you could also say that this is just a piece of marble. What they really are cultural artifacts. And now we have the ability to create digital cultural artifacts. And in doing that, we can assign value to them. And this creates an entirely new asset class that has never existed before. And just like there are many imitations, there is only one original. But that's just the beginning. This is where we are right now in the adoption cycle of NFTs. And again, we're in the dial-up modem phase of this new revolution. In the future, NFTs will become our car titles, our mortgages, our passports, even our diplomas. And they're all encrypted and verifiable. And it should be that way. Because right now, as we go more into the virtual world in a deeper way, we don't have a digital solution for sensitive documents. NFTs provide that. Now, this is the best example of NFTs right now as an art form, is the Bored Ape Yacht Club. It is a collection of 10,000 images of apes that were randomly generated based off of different traits, so that every image is unique. And this project was minted or created and distributed on OpenSea around April of 2021. And at that point, nobody really knew what an NFT was. And these apes sold for about 0.3 ETH or Ethereum, which at that time was around $810. It seems expensive, except that, this is what they are today. Now, this is the floor price of a Bored Ape Yacht Club piece of art. This is basically the cheapest price you can get for a piece of that art. And this is the price of that in dollars as of this week. Except that, why? Now, what they did that was brilliant was they created a community. And so last fall, they threw the creators of the collection threw a party in New York City, and they invited all the owners of the NFT to that party. And the only way to get in was to show proof that you owned one of those apes because you had that NFT. You could prove it on the blockchain. And it turns out that this JPEG was really just the beginning of this movement, because what it provided was a ticket with access to communities and events and future drops and anything else that they could think of in the future. And by owning one of these, you were already involved in that exclusive community, and you were going to be the first ones to find out about what they were going to do as it comes out. And then this happens. So Adidas partners with the kind of top 3 pioneering NFT artists in the space at the time. And they are creating crossover movements between the physical and the digital world. And they're using the community that was created and the following surrounding a Bored Ape Yacht Club as one of the main drivers of this movement. Now, what they offered to do after that announcement was made is to sell an NFT on OpenSea that was actually, it was a physical outfit. It was that green outfit right there that you could own. And also the 3D version of that avatar for games or anything else you'd want to do in the future. And these were important crossover moments in the NFT universe, because, that was always the argument, is like, well, these are just JPEGs. And it's like, okay, but what are they really? They're actually, their access to community and their access to culture. And how do we cross over the virtual and physical worlds in that way? And after they did that, they partnered with Animoca Brands to create a NFT game, which has yet to come out yet or be announced. But again, this is an example of a movement and a brand and a company that started from NFTs and is branching out into everything else, almost kind of like a, Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're moving into different aspects of culture, and it started with the community that was built and the following that was made and the money that was made with these NFTs last year. Now, as it starts to propagate across the culture, celebrities are getting involved, and these are both prominent owners of at least one ape each. And the thing about that is, as it spread across the culture, people started to put them as their profile pictures on Twitter, just as like a flex move. And the apes were kind of the first ones to do it, on top of CryptoPunks. We're kind of like the first ones, but like, in my opinion, the Bored Ape Yacht Club has done a much better job of cultivating a culture out of their art. But it got so outrageous that Twitter had to finally add a feature that it authenticated and, certified and verified what your NFT was on your profile picture. And then it would change the frame to this hexagon. Now, this just happened pretty recently. And what's pretty cool is it was developed and shipped by a team that was led by none other than Sohail Oliei, who I graduated with from the Brandcenter in 2014, and is just really all around a fantastic guy. So that was one of the offshoots of this NFT culture driven by Bored Ape Yacht Club that has started to like seep into other parts of our lives. And I don't have enough time right now to talk about the announcements that are coming after Twitter did this, because now everyone's seeing that like people want to show off their art, and they want to be able to show off not just their art, but they want to show off that they own the art, because of course there's people that are just going to right click and save those images. That's happening a lot right now, especially because there's so much money being made. So this NFT authentication certification process is going to start to seep around into many other different social media platforms. It's just another offshoot of Web3 / the metaverse. Now, what's happening this year are music NFTs. This is kind of the big forecast for 2022. And what that kind of means is artists are going to be able to sell their music directly to their audience. Now, through the use of smart contracts, which are, basically a code structure built into the NFT, they can set a price for their art, for their music. They can sell it to their audience, and they'll get a royalty from that. And then the audience that owns that music can then sell it to other people and get a royalty from that. And also a royalty goes back to the artist. And this is all done with code, and it's all automatic and transparent. And so it's kind of like, what's the use of a middleman anymore? What is the need for a distributor or a record company if the artist can just sell it right to their audience and there's royalties taken automatically? So that's coming this year. But that led me to think about something of where we are right now in the world. We don't really own anything anymore in general, as far as culture goes. We kind of just pay for access to content, or we get served ads on the free plan. But we don't have, once DVDs kind of went away, buying a movie or music has kind of gone away as well. And in that way, we've kind of forgotten what it was like to own something and what that can even mean if we wanted to give it away or sell it after. And that's one of the things that is really revolutionary about Web3 in general, is it's a revolution in digital ownership, not just digital ownership of music or art, but it's the sense that any digital asset that we can create can either be sold or owned by somebody. Now, the thing that is important to remember is in Web 2, which we are currently in, the only thing we can own outright is a domain name. And everything else we just freely give away for likes, comments, and follows. So Web 3 is going to change that. Now, I just want to quickly mention play to earn gaming. I wish I had more time to explain this, but gaming is going to be massive. And in that same sense of music NFTs and owning a digital asset, we're going to be able to own the skins that we buy in Fortnite. Or if you're a 3D artist, you could make your own skins for games that are coming up and either wear them on your avatar or sell them on the marketplace. And the thing is, games like Fortnite are kind of like a money pit right now, where you just kind of shell out money and then you get things out of it. But like after that, the transaction's over. So what this is going to offer is the ability to own the things that you purchase in the game that you can wear on your avatar, but then sell them to other people. And this is all going to take place in an environment where there's a crypto token that underlies inside that game. Now, it could be Ethereum or it could be something else, but the point is there will be a currency that's publicly tradable inside and outside that game, and it's going to turn games not into money pits anymore, but really kind of miniature economies. And that's another revolution in digital ownership. And I wish I had more time to explain what's happening in gaming, because that's going to be another huge movement that's going to come out of NFTs and crypto and blockchain this year. But I want to go into some current events that have just recently developed. The first one is Nike buying the virtual shoe company Artifact. Now, I think when Adidas announced what they were doing, Nike wanted to jump in, but they didn't want to have to do the development on their own. So they purchased this company who was a little bit over a year old that really focused on making digital shoes for virtual avatars. And they obviously developed really great tech, augmented reality tech that was very flashy and it worked really well. So Nike acquiring a company like this obviously puts them in a position to make unique Nike shoes that are digital, that can go on your avatar either in a game or in this avatar world that we're going to be living in, where we have universal avatars moving between different worlds. And the next one really is a huge one, is another play for the metaverse. Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard for $70 billion. Now, this is the largest acquisition in history, and it's a direct move into the metaverse, because the thing about Microsoft that is, I think, positions them the best out of anybody is they already own the world of productivity in the workplace. If they can put in a 3D world inside Microsoft Teams, and we can start having meetings, not tomorrow, but like in a couple years, that use virtual tech like AR or their HoloLens inside of Microsoft Teams, that's kind of be the first entry point into the metaverse, so to speak, of work. And I think, in my opinion, work is actually going to be the first place that we're doing all this. And play and gaming is going to have its own thing, but it's going to take a while for everyone to get really into, I think, using some kind of virtual headset in a gaming context. But for work, makes a lot more sense. And the third one is, Sony, I think, reacting to Microsoft buying Bungie, which makes Destiny 2. Now, these are all gaming companies. They're already pretty well positioned for a big impact in the metaverse, but I think they see what is possible outside of just gaming, and it's more about creating virtual worlds and using those game mechanics in different ways. And so PlayStation and Microsoft, I think, are doing a pretty good job of positioning themselves into this metaverse. And again, like, these companies are not going to be making these humongous purchases if they don't think the metaverse and Web3 is the future. And it kind of, it's a major stake in the ground that they're going to become the innovators and the ones creating the world first that we enter into in a virtual way. Now, the last one just happened yesterday. Facebook lost the most money in one day in stock market history. Now, this actually doesn't have to do so much with the metaverse, but it's going to obviously shape how they are going to enter into the market. One of the tweets I saw was investors sold shares because they realized Meta was actually still just Facebook, and it still has a lot of problems and a pretty strong negative reaction in the public for what Facebook is and what Meta is. And it's going to plague them. And they're the ones that took kind of the largest, kind of showiest intro into the metaverse last year when they changed their name. But again, all of these companies are positioning themselves to be major players in whatever's coming in the metaverse in this next decade or 20 years. And again, we're at the dial-up internet modem phase of whatever this is. So we don't really know what's happening, but we see all these things happening. We see all these companies making moves and these like announcements being made. It's certainly going to be something for the next 10 years that we're all going to be involved in. Now I want to talk about some notable projects that I think use Web3 tech, NFTs, and brands in a really exciting way. And this is they're kind of laying the groundwork for what's going to be coming, and definitely as you graduate and in the next 5 years at least. Okay, Super Bowl. It's this weekend or next weekend. They are selling digital tickets as collectibles to whoever wants to buy them. Now, I want to start with this one because they didn't talk about anything. They just are selling digital tickets. And this is also in response to like the pandemic kind of taking away that paper ticket idea. To cut down on interactions between people, they started selling digital tickets anyway a couple years ago, and they just didn't think about how to cash in on that idea. But this, like going back to the Bored Ape Yacht Club example, this is just an electronic ticket, and it's not the same as having a scrapbook of your favorite concert tickets and the things that you've gone to. Those paper tickets don't exist anymore. But there's an idea that you might have a virtual scrapbook with virtual tickets in them. But I don't think this is actually very viable because unless they have some kind of major announcement that goes on in the Super Bowl, and they might, the sense of like digital art as collectibles is kind of, we've kind of moved on from that. Like there needs to be something that happens with this collectible, with this NFT that we purchase. And I just hope that it is some kind of entry point, like intro into a new community or maybe access to other drops or something. But this is something that, on its face right now feels like kind of a miss, because I don't think I don't know, unless there's some kind of announcement that's going to happen. I don't know if this is going to be something that is going to last. Now, the thing that's interesting about Pepsi, who always does the halftime shows, they're actually giving away their NFTs as these 3D microphones in the sense of like they're, in the trend that we're seeing right now is they're 1,000 or 2,000 variations on a similar object. Now, what they're doing though is they're trying to do the opposite of what Coca-Cola did, which was just kind of sell expensive NFTs. They want to be able to lower the barrier of entry, and you're only going to be responsible for the gas fees, which are kind of like the transaction fees of buying NFTs on the Ethereum blockchain. So they want to give away their NFTs and then obviously provide access later on down the road. They have a roadmap, but they also are making an effort to offset the carbon footprint of the energy that's created by minting these NFTs on the Ethereum blockchain. So this is a unique change to NFTs. Most people don't give them away for free, except for the transaction fees. And then assuming there's going to be more of an announcement as the Super Bowl gets closer, or maybe there's some kind of thing that happens after someone has these NFTs after the halftime show. Those are two interesting things that are going to happen next weekend. So, this one is actually really cool. NBA Top Shot. Now, this is kind of the thing about, basketball cards baseball cards, they're collectibles. You do want to have a collection of cards. This is something that we've always done. And they're taking this into a new level where you're actually able to buy pieces of a game. You're able to buy a play that a player that you like made. As you can see, it goes from $5 to $500,000, depending on what the actual play is and who the player is. But I think this is actually, I don't know if there's going to be any kind of utility after this, like if you just get this and that's it. But the sense of, instead of owning a picture of a basketball player, you're actually going to be owning the play that they made that made them famous, or some kind of, magical thing they did as an actual collectible. I think it's a pretty cool evolution of this type of digital art. And it's like an evolution of the collectible itself. Now, the next thing that's pretty cool, I think this just came out this week. Coachella is actually going to be selling soundscapes of its concert. So on top of keys and other art that can be available, they're going to be recording soundscapes at the festival that can be sold as NFTs. Then, of course, can then be resold on marketplaces by the owner. And if you're interested, the sale, I think, starts today. So this is a cool, I think, evolution of live experiences into the digital world, and things that couldn't exist before. This is an actual evolution in technology that is useful to the things that are happening in this type of event. So that's a cool evolution. This is one I think is actually super interesting. This is Robert Mondavi Wines. Now they are having an anniversary, and what they're doing is they partnered with this porcelain artist to create around 2,000 porcelain wine bottles that have a special blend of wine in them. And the only way you get that bottle is by buying a piece of generative art, which they've also partnered with an artist. And that art is the NFT that you buy on the marketplace. So they are using the NFT model as a ticket for access. And then through that access, you get a real bottle of wine that's unique. And then you also get a ticket to an event, a wine tasting later on this year. And these are all things that you get as proof of owning this NFT. And this is a wine company. I mean, they are kind of the traditional brand you would think would not care about what's happening in the metaverse and Web3. And they come out with a really unique, innovative idea that still sticks true to their values and provides something that's unique, that couldn't reach an audience before without this technology. I think that's super cool. There's a lot of very innovative, unique ways to use this technology, and it's not going to be just tech companies and game companies that can benefit off of it. Okay, so what does this all mean for Brandcenter students? Okay, I think it's important to remember is you're going to be graduating this year and next year into a world full of companies that are scrambling to make sense of what this is, and also have probably entered into it already, or have made some kind of mistake already into it. So this is being built as we speak, and you can all be a part of it. So if you think this is a dystopian nightmare, then it will be a dystopian nightmare. But if you think it's possible to help change the world for the better, it can be that too, because you have the choice and the power to make it happen, because it's so early, because it's happening right now. And one of those things is, and because of that early adopter disruption phase that we're currently in right now, think about when Facebook started. It was blind madness to think that everybody had to have a Facebook page and 1 million followers. And we're seeing that madness again. But again, this is something that's a major disruption, but it's going to be around. It's not going anywhere. So it's important to practice skepticism, but to not be cynical and be prudent and think about how will this tech reach our audience in a new way? You know, how is it better than or more effective than current channels? And those are two questions that will never go away, no matter what happens. And just to remember that Web3 tech is a bridge to the audience or objective. It's not the end goal. And there's also this too. There's millions of people that could have no idea about any of this technology. And if you're in an agency or with a client that wants to talk about this, you know, it's important to be informed, but like think about what the actual customer is doing, because is the client doing this for their customer, or is it for their shareholders, or is it for a press release? Think about those things too. And this is something, that is getting faster every time. The niche market to mass adoption phase, it gets faster every time. So this one's going to be even faster because money is at the foundation of this new technology. You know, cryptocurrency are making millionaires and billionaires for this last year and a half and it's not even mainstream yet. It's just kind of still the beginning. But the fact that money's at the bedrock of what this is means there's a lot of interest to get things off the ground, a lot of availability of talent to get things off the ground. And at the same time, all this technology is open source. So everybody can see what everybody else is doing and they can innovate much faster. Those two things are shrinking this disruption phase from niche to mass adoption very quickly. And it's important too, again, with the disruption, to experiment and have that be key and manage expectations, because it's an important time right now where there aren't that many experts. And it's important to just embrace that. There's no book on this, and it means we can all write it together. The thing about it is these types of opportunities only come around once in a generation. And I think back to the dial-up modem phase that I grew up in. You know, this is kind of a disruption on that scale. And to just jump in. And as a creative brand manager, think about the authentic ways brands can enter this space. This is an important question to ask. And there are many authentic ways, as we saw with Robert Mondavi and other things that are going on. But it's important to stay authentic and think about where in the evolutionary path the company or the brand wants to be. Because if you think about it, for like mobile phones, you can be an innovator, a fast follower, or last to market. And they're all important and they all require innovation. But where on that path do they want to be? These are all important, like as the mobile phone example, these are all great phones. They all came at different times. And so it's not wrong to wait past the innovation phase because, again, it's so early. Everybody right now is an innovator. And that's a good and a bad thing because there's two other movements that the brands and companies could jump on. And then think about, you know, a competitive analysis. Should they include, you know, NFT like campaigns or effectiveness or any other kind of jump? Like that's going to be something that could be considered in the next couple of years in these jobs. Okay, for strategists, remember that it's about understanding what your client needs and also what they think they need. And you're going to need answers for both of them. Another one too, that's part of this disruption is, what are the measurements here? Because likes and views and comments and subscriptions and follows, those things, at least right now, aren't going to work in whatever metaverse shape that happens in the next few years. There's going to be different metrics for understanding effectiveness of campaigns or objectives. And, this is just a kind of a general question that's going on right now, is what are the measurements besides, sales of NFTs? And then, what happens after that? Those metrics are still being figured out. And because it's so early, it's an opportunity to jump in and write that book. I'm sorry. For ADs, really just think about how to present and organize ideas in the 3D world. You don't have to know game engines, but you have to know what's possible with them and what's not possible with them. And gaming in general is going to be kind of a bedrock, whether it's for work or for play. Gamification and gaming is kind of the genesis of a metaverse experience. And then just being around the 3D lexicon and knowing the language of 3 dimensions. If you want to get deep, Blender's great. It's free. It's powerful. And it's really what people are using right now that are kind of DIY artists that want to get into art creation in the 3D world. Blender is becoming the standard, and it's great. Double Dimension, I think it's just a nice it's a low technical barrier, an easy, quick program to just put a model up and have like a mock-up done really quickly. I think it's pretty great for what it is, but it's very limited. But in that limitation, it becomes pretty easy to use. Okay, copywriters. It's just about one part of this is knowing the language and the memes and the trends of what's happening in the culture around this. Twitter's like the place to be. Discord is where the communities get built after NFT projects are being made. Reddit is another one. But the thing about it is you just kind of have to be in it. And a lot of that takes place on Twitter. There's not really a lot of central places besides that where everything's happening. And then this will never change. It's still about storytelling and concepts and participatory narratives, which means you're not telling a story, you're really having a dialogue. And it's more about choosing your own adventure. It's writing for interactions. And about, short form, long form, just being more agnostic and able to transfer between the different media, because they're all mixing together. And in that mixing together, there's new ones being made. For XDs, 3D, MR, game engine mechanics. Think about, as experience designers, Solidity is the coding language if you want to get deep into it. But as experience designers, the metaverse is all about experiences. So whatever that shows up as in a game engine or in a mixed reality setting, it's all about creating experiences. So I think, just kind of being more deeply involved in all those mechanics is going to be a really special skill set to know. Now, it's important to talk about criticisms. Yes, the environmental impact is real, and it's actually kind of designed that way, unfortunately, because of the consensus mechanism called proof of work. And that's also going to be changing. It's slow on purpose for security, but again, as these technologies are innovating and the people are creating new things, the the proof of work consensus is changing into a proof of stake consensus, which is faster. It's more efficient on the energy. And, again, it's messy right now as everything is being created, but it will get better. Now, representation, it's a problem. And the only way to really combat that is education and participation. There's a lot of people and people of color, minorities jumping in and educating their followers and themselves about how to make a difference, because they see this disruption happening and they see the opportunity to rewrite the narrative of so many movements before. And it's, another opportunity and an invitation to get involved and also help others get involved. This is a great follow, by the way. Okay, centralization. There's still platforms. There's still tech giants making things. I honestly don't know the answer to this yet, but the point of Web3 and the promise of it is decentralization. I think what's happening actually right now is we're in the middle of that phase of like morphing between Web 2 and Web 3. So there's still that sense of we need a platform for this, or we need a centralized place for this. This is also, if you went back to the internet at the very beginning, like the year 2000, and we said, oh, the future is going to be social media. And it's like, what does that mean? What does that look like? We had no concept of what was possible years down the road as we got smarter about the technology. I think we can't really imagine a decentralized web right now, and it's going to be built. But we're in the middle of just a centralized mindset. And accessibility is still clunky. It's expensive. It's weird. It's a new experience. Yeah, there's a high barrier of entry to this. But these are all opportunities for innovation and opportunities for invention and creative problem solving. This is all an invitation to do the things that we're the best at and be involved in movements that make them better. So yeah, it's certainly complicated, but it's all being figured out right now, and we can all be involved in that because we're still so early in everything. And remember, like, we're here. We're at this phase. And history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And this time, don't be this guy.
Thanks, Rick. You have a lot of good stuff in the chat there. I wonder if Kaz and Ryan can take a look and see if there's any good questions.
I actually pulled a couple. I think one of the biggest discussions that's happening right now is within the state of being environmentally friendly. And I think some of the questions that I pulled was one from Zay, which was, I wonder if there's a less harm way to mine NFTs. There are a couple of articles about how NFTs are harmful to the Earth's climate. And essentially, what are your thoughts when it comes to how it's harming our planets and how we can go around it, especially being a specific field or topic that isn't regulated, where other companies can be regulated. This is decentralized, so no one can put anything on top of it and no one can control it. So I think that's one of the bigger discussions right now. And I can also go off of other people's questions in the same topic as well.
Just around the environmental impacts.
I think environmental impacts, but especially since this is a space that is decentralized. So even if we wanted to regulate it, you can't. And how we can essentially stop hurting our planet even more at a very much rapid pace as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I had the answer to that. I mean, again, I think we are all smarter this time around, and there is a very concerted effort in making this more efficient and not harming the planet. But like I said, it's messy right now because we're figuring everything out, and those problems have to be solved, and they can be, and this is going to get better because we're going to innovate on all of it, and we know that we have to do it. That's really the only thing I can think of right now. There's a lot of, I heard this story about a gas mining company. There's actually a coal mining company that had a bunch of excess natural gas, and instead of burning it off in the atmosphere, this happened in Utah, they actually made a Bitcoin mining node out of an ocean container and ran the entire thing off of natural gas, the excess natural gas that it was burning off. So there are potential solutions, but there's also like a broader question of all of our things are destroying the planet, and there's other things that, like, I don't know, I just think, like, yes, it's very bad, but there's many other things that are bad too. And where do we draw the line? Does that mean that we just throw this all away because it's dangerous? I think that we're going to make it better, and it's going to be beneficial for everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. If anyone else has also questions and want to bring it up as well, please. I know a lot of the questions in the chat were directly for that space, and not sure if anyone else has specific questions or wants to speak out or unmute and ask.
I have a little bit of a question. So Rick, I totally understand that in order to be able to create a technology, something new, a lot of stuff goes unregulated at first, and that's happened with a lot of technologies in the past. Something that I worry about is that we talk about NFTs and crypto as having this sense of inherent risk, but very often we talk about that inherent risk to the individual. We are advertisers working for these companies. And right now, I think that promoting these NFTs only really works for these companies because they are unregulated and unrecognized by the US government. Since they're unrecognized by the US government, like, that's kind of the whole appeal of crypto and NFTs. If NFTs are to become a legal form of ownership, to be recognized by everybody, they would have to be recognized, but then that comes with regulations. Then that comes with responsibilities to our consumer. As we start developing the space of crypto and NFTs, can we ethically market these to any of our consumers at all without putting our own companies at risk?
Well, what kind of risk do you mean? Like financial risk or ethical risk? What kind of risk?
Both, honestly. I've noticed that a lot of the marketing for crypto rests on this notion of a get rich quick scheme. Now, if you're being realistic about crypto, you know that that's not true. Currently, the top 10,000 investors of Bitcoin hold 30% of all Bitcoin share. The crypto space is already reflecting the inequality of the American economy. The reason why companies are able to promote NFTs is because they're unregulated. But in order for NFTs to really have this inherent value, and we're going to have to continue developing it, they will have to be recognized as a form of legal ownership. But then once that legal ownership comes in, then they become regulated. Then we can no longer ignore the ethical concerns about marketing these towards low-income people who have no protection if things go awry. Because the currency is unregulated, there are no protections. So if we keep marketing these to people and giving them sort of a false sense of security, that can put our consumers in hot water, and that can put us in hot water. So as we continue, how do we start addressing that from the perspective of an advertiser? Because a lot of these problems seem to be inherent to the way that they work, and that's not necessarily something that at the time, currently, that it seems that we can change as advertisers. So how do we go about that as we go into our companies and explore this space?
I mean, that's a great question. It's almost kind of like, is this problem being invented because of NFTs, or is it invented because we're humans? And NFTs are just showing that more, so I just like, it's kind of like a more general question about, because it's not like companies weren't, doing unethical things to, people that had no choice before NFTs happened. This isn't like a new development. So I think what you're asking is, how do we change that now there's a major disruption? And I think the quickest answer that I have in my head is because you are educated in what's happening and you go into these companies, you are the strongest proponent for that change. And again, we don't know how this is all going to look, but because we are educated and because we're entering into these places and we have a position, we have a major opportunity and more leverage than normal to make a difference. That's all I really can say about it.
I think that my question was reworded a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I'm not asking about how we can necessarily make that change. I would like to make that change, but I'm saying that as advertisers, unless we change how NFTs and crypto work, which frankly, I think most of that is out of our hands, how can we ethically promote these to the general populace when crypto is already reflecting the inequality of the American economy?
Well, okay, you mentioned Bitcoin. I don't know. I think in my opinion, that's like the seventh coolest thing happening in all of that right now, because there's so many other coins and tokens and movements behind those tokens that are doing the same thing that you're talking about. This is a chance right now to look at this optimistically and address inequality in a way that hasn't been available before, ever. So I think using Bitcoin, in my opinion, it's something that it's influential as a crypto to show people that it's a movement that's working, but there are so many other opportunities and fortunes to be made moving to help people have more equality that aren't going to be involved in Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. I think that Bitcoin is cool too. Honestly, I think that blockchain technology is very interesting. I'm just wondering, is there a form of protection that we can give our consumer?
No, I think that's all of us. That's kind of the thing. I mean, if we're empowered and educated about what is possible, we can make that change as we enter into, or not me, but you all can make that change.
So I understand. So I'm sorry. I know I'm like kind of on like a soapbox. I've already asked like 2 questions. Do you mind if I follow up with just one more?
Sure, Sabrina. And then I think we probably have 1 minute for Dylan's question. And then I know Rick has lots of office hours and would love to continue the discussion offline too.
Oh yeah, I'll be there. I'll be in the basement actually at 2:30.
So a lot of us, and I feel like I can speak for a lot of people in this chat, that there are plenty of people who are a bit unfamiliar with crypto. You said that as we become more educated and explore this space, we can help it become more ethical. Do you currently have a vision or suggestions or any ideas for how NFTs and crypto could make this change to become more ethical?
I got a ton. No, man, that's a deep question. The thing about, okay, just a real quick answer. The thing about crypto and virtual currency and internet money that I think really fascinates me is anything that's digital right now is a product of our imagination. And it doesn't have to be tied to anything actually real, because we've made everything up that lives inside the virtual world. And for the first time ever in human history, we're also able to make up money in that same way. And it's going to really, it's going to force us to really confront our idea of what money is and what value is and who deserves it and who doesn't. That's more of a deeper question, I think, that really fascinates me about this whole movement, is that we're confronting a question that we haven't had to ask as an entire civilization ever. And it's happening right now. So we can do all those things. And I think, yes, an equitable future is is possible because of this opportunity. It's not about just advertising, it's about everything. So that was the quick answer.
Hey, I would just jump on there. I think Rick is exposing us today to a paradigm shift. With that shift is going to come a host of very complicated questions, right? Philosophical questions, economic questions, political questions, social good questions. I don't think Rick or any of the faculty pretend to have any of the answers, but I think this is a jumping off point for a very engaged discussion among, the community of Brandcenter. And so, just hope that this invites the discussion, and we sort of equally approach this conversation with, a desire to do right, by this issue and for each other. So just, hopefully this will now permeate into all of our classrooms and hallway discussions and be conversations you can take into the community at large.
Yeah, thank you.
Dylan, did you have a question? This will be our last one.
First of all, thank y'all for taking the time to hold this space. I was going to try and answer or help answer Sabrina's question. And Sabrina, first off, thank you for posing the question. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that you asked a learning question instead of put a blanket criticism because you might have found a link. I think when we step into an education space like this, that's super important to recognize so that we can create a safe dialogue. As far as, an answer, ethically speaking, I think it's important in my mind. I think it's important to approach this through an educational lens. So if I was going to tell someone, or if I was in a discussion with someone who's interested in any form of crypto, NFTs, whatever, it's important to educate instead of push the message. And I think if we get into a position, whether it be in-house or agencies, that is the most appropriate way to move forward in any working initiative in this space, because there's such a learning curve, because it's so fragmented in terms of tools, and there's so many different barriers and challenges. It's incredibly, there's a lot of inequality there, that wealth gap there, it's definitely there. And so education is the most important aspect for us to, what's our first step, and I know there are entire Discords dedicated to the educational curve of how do you even get involved in the space. And that question ethically, it applies to everything else, not just crypto. Ethically, do I feel like I can sleep at night if I sell an awful consumer packaged snack goods, Little Debbie's, when our nation is struggling with health and diet? I mean, that's a question that can be asked in a lot of other scenarios as well. And so, yeah, that's my 2 cents. And I know that there's a lot of other smart people, smarter than me as well, who can help answer that question. But that was my take on it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, this was a fantastic discussion. Like Rick said, he's going to be, not to bombard him, but he's going to be in the basement at 2. I'm sure he'd love to continue the conversation. And Rick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Happy Friday, y'all.
Yeah, you too.